Ms. Moynihan, welcome. Thank you very much for being with us. And also joining us now to moderate the panel is Rudolph Lohmeyer III, Head Global Transformations Institute at Kearney. Rudolph, thanks for joining us this morning. Hope your energy is up this morning. We're looking forward to your moderator avatar.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much. The energy of our introductions at this event shall never be surpassed, and that means a great deal. Good morning, everyone. Great to be with you. I feel very privileged to be on this stage with these gentlemen because the issue that we are discussing is where abstraction and words meet the reality of governing and of creating public goods. And it happens in the context of what could politely be called a paradox. It could also be called the teeth of a shark, which is, on the one hand, governments around the world, as you know, we now face record levels of global public debt as a percentage of GDP. Governments around the world are facing fiscal constraints, pressures for more fiscal discipline, and yet at the same time, governments must do more to prepare for this uncertain future, arguably than they ever have before in countless domains. So this is the tension that sets the context for this discussion. And gentlemen, I'd like to start with that discussion. How are you managing the tensions in your country most productively or with most difficulty between the fiscal constraints that you face and the demands that you face to be prepared for the future? Please.
Yeah, it's a very, and in our country, South Africa, it's a huge tension at the moment. Because there's huge demands, because there's so much inequality and poverty in South Africa, so there's so much demand for government spending, but at the same time we're getting into more and more debt, and more of our spending is being actually eaten up by interest payments. So there's no value for money for actual interest, because you're actually getting no benefit, you're paying somebody else. But just to take a step back, I think the key thing is to make sure the efficiency of spending is very important. You know, I talk about a bucket that's full of holes. So if you pour more money, more water into the bucket, there's just leaking. So the key thing is to stop the corruption and wastages in the system and get more value for money. So I think that is key. I think at the moment the debate is about should we spend more or spend less, but the key thing should be we should be spending more efficiently and more effectively.
Thank you so much. And gentlemen, this idea of investment, this balance between having less but needing to do more, how are you managing it, sir?
So actually, Sri Lanka was struggling with this issue, and we went bankrupt a few years back, about 3-4 years back. Because Sri Lanka is spending, we have free education, free health, but our indexes are quite good because of that. Literacy rate is about 95%, life expectancy is about 80. We are quite close to European standards. But at the same time, the debt is a huge problem and corruption is a huge problem. Debt is about 100% with all this public spending. So we have to strike a balance, and I would always advise to less government and to, because we have a lot of, we have about 1.5 million of public servants, and that the salary package is a huge burden for the government. It should be about 500,000 in reality. But people have got used to this left sort of idea. That I think in India also it's a similar situation. Everybody likes to have a government job, to have a pension, to relax. But supply and demand, I would believe in supply and demand, so that the private sector always gets the best efficiency. So I would always, for us to come out of this problem, for us to have a growth rate like in India, 7 point, we haven't had over 7 for a long time. That's mainly because the government spending and wastage, and as my colleague said, corruption as well. So less corruption if it's privatized, most of the areas, except for the most important areas, to keep for the government, and to have more private sector and less government. Because if you take an example, if you have a vehicle given to you by the government, you know how you maintain it. But if it's your own vehicle, you know how you maintain it. Total different concepts. When it's yours, it's different. When it's the government, it's totally different. And we see it everywhere. So less government and more private, get you involved. You're responsible for your, otherwise it's not going to, because especially our countries, we have been too much government spending.
Very clear. Thank you. So, Mr. Moynihan, before we come to you, so we've heard about the importance of efficiency, of managing corruption, in both cases leaks out of the system, but also understanding the proper role of government versus the private sector and not overreaching. What has been your experience in managing this tension?
Gosh, I think one of the biggest aspects on it, because it's almost a human expectation on it. You're seeing a huge, say, corporation tax coming into us, and you're coming off the back of a huge spend in COVID, and there's a lot of expectation that that kind of money release it to us, and that that release it to the consumer, to the wider public, and it's almost like managing an expectation rather than managing money. It's an extra aspect on top of it. How are we managing it? It's a struggle for sure. We've started to phase towards more strategic investment funds as well. Government have set up 2 of those over recent budgets, and it's helping to kind of maybe manage a little bit of the expectation. But I think that whole human angle has to be taken into account on it as well. It isn't just about cold, hard numbers. And like, you'll have competing interests, the wages demands because of cost of living going up, and then trade union trying to come together on an agreement. We're right in the teeth of it all at the moment, and I would say it's nearly as much as managing expectation as managing money.
I completely understand. By the way, and this is your segue, as if perfectly planned, which it wasn't, is to the relationship between making fiscal choices based on a systematic framework, on a true framework of investment, versus really it being driven by politics. In my country, the fiscal challenge we face, which is vast, is a function of the politics, the political impossibility of ever raising taxes and so forth. So what is your experience, sir, in the balance between a systematic approach to investment versus the pressure of the politics?
Yeah. Again, very good point. And we were chatting in the car this morning, and we were discussing it because politics, elections is every 5 years. So often politicians think, and it came up in the previous panel too, is best way to actually get elected. So there's very much short-term thinking, and I think that's a big issue. And the short-term thinking compromises the long-term thinking. And I think President Modi's been in power for a long time, and you can see the consistency of having a particular policy and sticking through it. So I think there's just too much short-term dominance, and we all believe in democracy, but sometimes democracy every 5 years a change in government. So how do we get people to vote for us, and let's give them more money? And it actually in the long run it's actually defeating. So it's to just try and change that mindset that there needs to be more long-term thinking as opposed to short-term thinking. Unfortunately, politics plays a role in that.
You're preaching to your moderator. I couldn't agree with you more, of course. And let's come back in this direction. So, Mr. Moynihan, back to you, because Ireland also came through something very difficult quite successfully, made some deliberate bets. What was the balance in that between a framework approach, good fortune? Tell us.
Yeah, definitely there was a very stressful time for several years on it, and I think even after that, and the very difficult decisions that would have been made by so many at that stage, and sacrifices by the public as well, there's almost like a scarring there, that there's almost a fear of making a wrong decision and maybe a fear of spending, and that hangover is there, as well as something that will be almost impeding moving on as well. Certainly a lesson learned on it. But I think that we also need to take a step back and decide on how are we going to go spending from here, and what's going to guide us on it. And whereas there's always a huge focus on economic indicators, GDP, unemployment, and so on, that we need to recognise that we're actually living in a society and not in an economy, and that we should be guided by societal values, the things that are important to a society to steer the budget. And OECD have established a a well-being framework. New Zealand have been following up on it. We're started into that steps as well. And the idea behind it is that spending will be guided by the values of society, the quality of our housing, access to health care, educational attainment, biodiversity, the things that are important to us as a people will be guiding the spend rather than cold, hard GDP, unemployment and economic indicators.
Fantastic. Well, so let me say that you've actually arrived right on time, honestly, as you'll see. So what have we discussed so far? We started simply by, and I do this for the benefit of the audience as well, of course, by just acknowledging the benefit of governments being under fiscal pressure but having more expectations to prepare for the future. This man's exceptional expertise, I want to weave him into our discussion. So in talking about how it's being managed, managing efficiency and corruption, to removing leaks in the bucket, but now we're really discussing, and that's why I mean the timing of your arrival is so perfect, the investment framework. How to think about these investments, considering the very different future that we'll face. We can't do everything. The analytic frameworks for prioritizing. And what we just heard from our friend from Ireland, Mr. Moynihan, is that it's actually an exquisitely democratic point that you've made, that the framework should be tied to the politics, to the society, and to its values. But on the analytic side, tell us your perspective, sir.
Well, let me apologize sincerely for coming a bit late. Public spending, as it is a function of so many things, like I know have been discussed, and particularly, for us, public means mobilizing public resources and spending it in the interest of the public. And going forward, it varies actually from places to places. And the same way, the investment of such funds too vary. In developing countries where we still have a lot of challenges of security, of the SDGs and other social indicators, spending are normally channeled towards those directions. And in most of the developing countries, even the funding for such spendings are challenges, a big challenge, because most of the countries still battle in the public sector a lot of deficits in the funding they mobilize for spending. In other economies, that may vary because a lot of resources are mobilized and they have surpluses, they have different kind of fundings, that are accumulated over time. And the issue of investment now come into play. However, for me and for my country, maybe I will talk about, we face the issues of security, we face the challenges of still a lot of social indicators like education, health, and the like. We tend to channel most of our funding in those areas. And for investment purposes as well, the mechanisms used are mainly by our laws through the central banking system. We cannot channel any public fund outside instruments of government by our laws in our own kind of countries. Is completely a different area than the private, funding mechanisms that we are talking about. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mr. Senasinghe, you mentioned something so important. And of course, many people are now trying to think through how the private sector, as you've said, can contribute to the creation of public goods. In Sri Lanka, as you're making this transition, what is the model by which you think about where the private sector can play its most proper role and where government must play its role?
Well, it's actually, as you say, it's a double-edged sword to our part of the world if you take progressive ideas and you lose the election. So because people are very passionate about the public sector. And it's even they are not in public sector, they are not in the governance, but they're still passionate about it. That's a very attractive slogan for left politicians to say that let's keep the public service, let's spend more from the government. So energy, I would say energy, and partly health, education. We can privatize, we can get the people who can afford to spend. And Sri Lanka is a good destination for education tourism. It's a beautiful country and we have resources. So private universities were discouraged in Sri Lanka. The government which is in power, it was a Marxist government, and they were actually protesting against privatization. So that hindered our progress for a long time. And India started, I think, 20, 30 years ago, it started the transformation. Even though Sri Lanka started liberalizing and opening the economy in Asia, India took it to a different level and they started private. In Karnataka, I believe that's how India progressed. They started private universities. But Sri Lanka, we could not do it because there was a lot of protest, privatization of hospitals, people who could afford. I would suggest, when I was a minister, I was telling them even government hospitals have a paying ward where people can pay and maintain the hospital. But that was discouraged by the public servants saying that, no, it should not be, it should have this monopoly, we should control. So you must encourage the mindset also have to change. So it's different from your part of the world to our part of the world. And there's a lot of corruption in our part of the world, but you all have gone through that 30, 40 years ago. With progression, I think with development, I think that would happen. But as policy makers also, we must be bold enough we must be attractive enough to, charismatic enough to do the change and then win an election also, which is not easy. When you take decisions, progressive decisions, it's always not attractive. Good things are not very attractive. So you have to be bold and take that. And India has been able to, the bureaucracy is very strong in India. So our part of the world, when leaders change, the policies change totally, completely. And it's not the same in your part of the world. You all have a system. So India is a big country. India has, I think, gone forward. When Manmohan Singh brought these changes, the governments, progressive governments, continued with the strong bureaucracy. So but our countries, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Maldives, leaders changed the policies totally. So it's a zigzag way of going forward, which have actually hindered our development.
I mean, as I mentioned, I've spent the last 10 years in the Middle East. And there, of course, the governments have the resources to invest in the future, and invest they do, but even they are intensely focused on growing their private sector. Alan, and I know you can answer specifically with South Africa, but I know your awareness extends far beyond South Africa. What is the clearest way to think about making decisions with respect to the private sector and the public sector in creating public goods?
Yeah, so I think that for me, the political party I represent, we believe in a smaller government, and the government should play an enabling role to allow the private sector to flourish. So I think that is key, is we need to cut down on government regulations, and capital is fluid. Capital will go where it's wanted. So government must make an environment where capital is actually welcomed, where private investment is actually welcomed and encouraged. So I think the policies around that is saying we want capital, and how do we attract our country, make our country attractable to government, to private money, and that is a key, just to make an enabling. And in South Africa, we just got so much red tape, so much bureaucracy actually involved, that it's actually hard for private businesses to actually get involved. So it's just to cut down the red tape and just say, we want private investment, and how do we make an enabling environment for private business to flourish in our country?
Mr. Moynihan, in Ireland's famously conducive to the private sector, harnessing the private sector, but how do you see finding the right balance?
It's a real fine balancing line. I think like we've put in place, and over the years you would have had quite a bit of public funding being spent on infrastructure. We put in place the strategic investment funds that have been focused on, say, more environmental structures, roads, rail, and that kind of structure. But there's a realization that there is a need for further private investment in the likes of housing and various different infrastructure. And it's not popular, the idea of looking outside to make available funding for housing, private capital. But I think the realization is coming about there. I find in my own experience and what we would have seen of private funding over the years is that an example would be a school that would be built using a public-private partnership. The school manager isn't, or the principal isn't actually responsible or dealing with the infrastructure of the building, and they're finding that there's a real conflict with the PPP, and that you're probably much better off with your state-funded building rather than being too deep into a public-private partnership.
Well, thank you. Mr. Dankwambo, in Nigeria, help us. What have you learned about how to harness the private sector, harness market forces to create public goods, but yet remembering the central required province of the government? The balance between the private sector and the public sector in delivering public goods.
Well, like I said earlier, the very big restriction in Nigeria is that after the experiences of massive corruption sometimes, public investments were not channeled through private sector banks. They were channeled through the central bank, which is a mainly government bank. So for any kind of investment which involves the private sector, an environment is created where the two ventures, like he said, collaborate through PPP. And these are done through agreements over a period of time. For investments that will take place for a very long time, like railway building, airport building, these such are encouraged and are created through specified laws. Laws are established to ensure that that is accomplished. But any other investment with such collaboration is highly restricted, and because of our experiences over time.
You know, it's fascinating. In the United States, we've gone through the same journey. And so there was a period coming out of the 60s and the 70s where the fear of the robber barons and of people having too much power, we developed an entire policy infrastructure about controlling and preventing the ability to have too much power. But what it's done, for example, in my hometown, the city of New York, is to build a mile of subway is so unbelievably costly and time-consuming because of the extent of the regulatory hurdles. Much more, for example, than to build a kilometer or 2 kilometers of subway in Paris. And so this is an important tension. Okay, well, so now, if we can now turn to the future. So, as you know, my interest is, and you made the point so well, government has to address the suffering, the bleeding, the needs of its people in the moment, but it also has to invest in the future. Understanding what is needed in the future and where that investment should go. What are the best approaches you've seen to this? Sir, I start with you. To understanding from the longer term perspective, what do we most need, and investing there. How in Sri Lanka do you make the case for those investments, or is it difficult?
It's not difficult. It's, when it comes to investment, I think it will be easier. Welfare, it will be a bit difficult for the private sector to get. So two areas we have to separate investment and welfare. So welfare we have to maintain to keep the people, actually give them the basics. But in investment, I would say it's a good idea. We were talking about the highways. So what we would suggest, coming from Asia, we would get private companies to come and invest on highways, let's say highway, and for them to collect toll money for about 20 years and then hand it over to us. So we had in India, when Mr. Adani wanted to come to Sri Lanka with a wind power project, 500 megawatts wind power, it's I think 1 gigawatt, 500 megawatt wind project. So transmission line, they were going to spend $20 million on it, and after 10 years, they were going to hand it over to Sri Lanka. So that's a way of investing, getting investment from outside. Japan Railways, and I would, if I'm in power, if I can take a decision, I would invite Japan to do our railroads and for them to collect toll money for about 20 years and then hand over the system to us, because then the government is not spending on it and we are making money out of it as well. So that's a way that we can get investment to come in and for them to make the money and then for us to get rewards from that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Okay, gentlemen, let's turn to the third and final big segment. There'll be a closing round, but the third big segment is about technology, and all of us know it, and all of us hear it. In fact, in Davos, this is interesting. In Davos this year, people were giving you credit if you didn't just speak about artificial intelligence because it was becoming so worn out. Having said that, we know that artificial intelligence, advanced automated systems, can help government be more efficient, can help government decision-making. So I'd like to ask each of you, Alan, we'll start with you and come down the line. Where have you seen some of the most productive applications of AI and related technologies to managing this fiscal tension productively?
Yeah, so I've got to be honest, I think South Africa, we're behind the curve in this, which is very disappointing. I heard, you know, with India talking about the AI advancements and the impact that it can actually have on people's lives at a minimal cost. So from South Africa's perspective, we've been behind on it, and I think it's something that I certainly need to take back to Parliament and say it's an issue that we have to drive, because I think that the more you fall behind it, the more you fall behind it, you know, so you've got to stay up with it. So I think it is a key issue. It's a fundamental issue because you're going to have the ability to provide services to more people at a lower cost. So it is vital, and it's an important discussion that needs to take place in our country.
Mr. Moynihan.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a huge role for artificial intelligence and for various different technologies, but at a level where they're supporting the decision maker. The responsibility and the decision remains with and should remain with the minister or with the relevant person in the department, and be accountable on it. The AI is not accountable to the public. They don't go for a vote the way that the public representatives and the minister does, and it's the public's funding. So the responsibility should remain with the minister, and that the AI and the various tools would be as a support to the decision making. When you look, for example, you could automate the train service right around our cities and around our countries. But while there's a lot of automation in it, there's still a driver up there at the front. And it's almost like for the public as well, that they know that there's a comfort, that there's a person there controlling, and that it's not totally automated. I think very similar with the decision making on finance and on public expenditure. It has to be accountable with a person who's going to the public for a vote and supplement their decision making with the AI and the various technologies.
Thank you so much. By the way, sir, before I come to you, for those who don't know, one of the most productive early use cases of AI has been in fraud and corruption detection. It's just the tools by their nature are well suited to looking at data and discovering anomalies. So by the way, there's a study out of Stanford that showed incredible results. I'd be happy to share it with you, but I encourage you to see that as well, given the point on corruption. Sir, to you.
It's an important point. I think what matters when human-to-human connection, the attitude, the ego that comes into life. So, but with AI, I mean, computerization, I would not get into AI. Digitalization actually cut off the red tapes in Sri Lanka. So as much as you can develop and bring computer non-human without emotions, because take a public servant, his attitude, his approach will decide whether he would give you the service or not. If he doesn't like the way you walk, if he doesn't like your face, he might not. But a computer wouldn't do that. So the red tapes will be cut off. So technology, I think, will improve this, and it will be easier for the private sector to go forward.
Great. Now, with this panel, I'm committed that we're going to show superb fiscal stewardship, and we're going to give some time back to the event, but not too much. We have 2 minutes and 12 seconds. The final speed round, I'm just giving you warning. I'm going to ask each of you very rapidly one thing in which you'd like to see your government investing more, given the future we're facing, and one in which you'd like to see it investing less. But before I do, sir, artificial intelligence, where have you seen its most valuable application?
Well, like he rightly said, the AI goes in the same way with other technologies like blockchain technology to replicate transactions, you know, and ensure that it's everywhere, to reduce the incidences of fraud, to make traceability very possible and establish very good audit trail. So in ensuring that and making all the records available at any platform, fraud is eliminated, time of transaction is reduced, and efficiency is enhanced.
Fantastic. Okay, everyone, we've got a minute. We want to finish before that time. So for each of you, something you'd invest more and less, please, Alan.
So for me and for South Africa, I think that it's a manufacturing sector. We need to produce goods. I think we talk a lot about AI, but at the end of the day, goods still need to be produced.
Just 10 seconds, yeah. More and less?
And less is salaries and wages.
Okay. Mr. Moynihan.
It goes back it goes back to a point I made earlier. We live in a society, not an economy, and we should be guided by a well-being framework which invests in people. There should be more investment in the human capital and in society rather than following economic indicators.
And less in what?
Well,
that's the hard part.
It is.
Okay, over to you, sir, please.
So more in making platforms so that the private sector can get involved, less in where corruption and where progression hinders, less.
Great, we capture it. So the final word to you.
For me is to ensure very good, adequate audit trail and ensure traceability. Thank you.
Thank you. Please, everyone, the governments that can prepare their countries for the future through wise investment are those that will create the public goods our people need. Please give these remarkable gentlemen a warm round of applause and thank you.
And with that, we come to an end of our first segment for the day on Next in Business. What a very, very thought-provoking panel, isn't it? Some of these ideas, I'm sure you can apply it in your business and life from today itself. All right, we are now moving once again to one of the most awaited moments of NXT 2026. Every day, we have heard from a former head of state. And that trend is going to continue today as well. Because we are turning now